Hi, good morning. I'm Jen Childs with Penguin Random House Library Marketing, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the 29th annual Penguin Random House Library Journal Author Breakfast. I'm sorry that we can't be together in person this year, but as we all know, the show must go on. So we're here to present to you four amazing authors who you need to know more about. One of the upsides of a virtual breakfast is none of us had to get up at the crack of dawn to attend. So please grab your cup of coffee, your orange juice, your plate of waffles, and sit back and enjoy hearing from these amazing authors. But before we start, just a few words from my esteemed colleague Barbara Hofert at Library Journal. Thanks. Over to you, Barbara.
Hello, it's Barbara Hofert from Library Journal. Welcome to the Penguin Random House Author Breakfast, co-sponsored by LJ. Traditionally, this event is held at Book Expo, so we're grateful to the Penguin Random House folks for continuing a long-standing tradition online and for offering us four wonderful writers. They are Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Connie Schultz with a richly detailed historical debut novel, The Daughters of Erietown, from Random House. Robert Jones Jr. with another debut, The Prophets, fresh and unexpected writing about the relationship between two enslaved men on a southern plantation. That is from Putnam. The mega best-selling Camilla Läckberg, whose new thriller, The Golden Cage, reveals one preempted wife's awful revenge, from Knopf. And finally, PEN Open Award-winning Gina Apostol's The Revolution According to Raymundo Mata, set in the 19th century Philippines, from Soho Press. Four wonderful books to look forward to, and four wonderful authors to hear now.
Hi, I'm Sally Kim, publisher of Putnam, but more importantly, I am Robert Jones's editor. I'm very lucky to be able to call myself that. And here with me today is Robert Jones Jr., who is the author of the debut novel, The Prophets, which is out this January. Robert, it almost seems kind of strange to call this a debut novel because it certainly doesn't read that way. I remember the first time I read this book, it felt like I was reading a timeless classic. And there was a lot that was destined for you to write this book, which we'll get to in a minute. But first, let's hear a little bit about yourself. Libraries, I know, are very entwined with your memories of childhood, both challenging times and happy times. So tell us a little bit more about that.
When I was a kid, I know they don't do this anymore, but library was part of the curriculum. And so we would visit the in-school library like once or twice a week. And I remember my very first librarian was Mrs. Ferrin. And it's where I felt not just safe, but also it was a lot of fun. It was a break for us kids to get away from the everyday of the classroom, to go to this room with this wonderful woman who would read stories to us and let us listen to books on record and let us pick out our own books. And it's where I first fell in love with books. I realized they're important.
I remember hearing you once say that librarians were your protectors, which I think is a really interesting way to think about it. I think a lot of people have these kinds of memories of the librarians that they grew up with.
Yeah, librarians were my literal guardians. I lived, when I was growing up, in a neighborhood in Brooklyn with some racial strife. I lived in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. And the library that I used to go to was in one of the most hostile parts of the neighborhood. And it was maybe a 10-minute walk from my apartment to that library. And many a day it was a tumultuous journey. And I remember one time in particular when a librarian told me, I need you to continue reading, stay at this table, you'll hang out with me, because she knew it was dangerous for me to go home at the particular time that I wanted to go home. And she waited until the danger passed and walked me halfway home. And I'll never forget that, because it meant to me that not only were librarians my guardians, but the library was also my sanctuary. Mm-hmm. And it was a safe space.
Just thinking about the fact that you grew up surrounded with all these books, and now the idea that your book come January will be on a shelf, in a library, in many libraries. How does that feel?
Unbelievable, because here I was, this young boy growing up reading all the classics, whether it's James Baldwin or Toni Morrison or Alice Walker, Gloria Naylor. And now the idea that some child is going to be reading my book alongside those, I almost don't have the words to articulate what that feels like. It feels like a fantasy almost. It feels like it's a dream come true for sure, but it's still so unbelievable. I don't think I'll believe it until I walk into a library and see it on the shelf myself.
That'll be a moment. That'll definitely be a moment. So I want to mention for everyone just a one-liner on the book, because it's important to talk about what the book is, but I'm more interested to hear what you think the book is about. So, but first I'll say, The Prophets is the story of two enslaved men in antebellum South, and how their forbidden love and the human refuge they find in each other both saves them, challenges them, and also affects everybody on the plantation around them to often dramatic effect. The story, for all its truths, is can be dark, and it kind of manages to kind of explore some challenging ideas and really push the emotional sort of the read of it. But what's so surprising and what I love about this book so much is that it also manages to be extremely life affirming and hopeful. To me, it's always been a book about a celebration of love in all its forms. But now I'd like to hear what you think the book is about.
Well, for me, the book came from a question that I had. And that question was, what would it have been like to have been both Black and queer in such a horrific time in the country's history, under such violent circumstances? Because in all of the literature I had read, particularly about that period, whether it be slave narratives or fiction about that time period, it seemed to me that a voice was missing. I never got to see a Black queer person's experience there. I never got to hear a Black queer voice. And so I felt like Toni Morrison says, if you can't find what you want to read, you must write it. And so I felt like I had no choice but to write it. So I did a ton of research and tried to find anything where I could help myself imagine what that might have been like. And so The Prophets was born from that question. And I hope I did those voices justice.
I remember one of the first times we talked before we started working together, and I wrote this down because and I still have it written down in a notebook somewhere, because it was so moving to me, but also such a reflection of what this book really, the sum of all its parts, really kind of is infinite. I remember you said, this is not a story of not just of our ancestors' enslavement, but of their liberation. And I think in so many ways that really casts the book perfectly in the way that the scope of the book. So while it may be an historical novel, it's set in a very specific period, the issues are so relevant and so timely that it's actually kind of, when you read it through today's lens, it's kind of startling to see how much has changed, how little has also changed, and how you explore all those sort of tensions. Was that intentional to kind of also look at a very specific period in time? I know you mentioned that it's a particularly dramatic and important period of history, but was it difficult to kind of get yourself there?
No, it wasn't very difficult, because like you noted, there are so many golden threads between that period in history and our current moment. That while the landscape looks a little bit different, a lot of the pathologies at work are still in play. And it was easy to draw upon those things to help me imagine what it must have been like back then. When we look at plantations of the antebellum South, I don't see much difference between that and the prison industrial complex. When we look at overseers who were cruel and abusive to these enslaved peoples, in some ways, police officers function that way today. And so a lot of what I imagined wasn't hard to imagine because of our current political climate. And I think it was maybe a little bit intentional to draw those parallels, or to write the story in a way that would make readers understand that while some things have changed, some things have not.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to end on a surprising note here, because one of the things that I have always loved about you and your interests is that some people might not know you're a lifelong comic book fan and collector. In fact, I think maybe we could peer over and see all the boxes and boxes of comic books that you have in your office there. And actually, I can tell you that I do see the influence of some of that storytelling and that narrative in this book in a very surprising way, which I won't give away. But what is one surprising thing that our librarian friends might not know that connects them to superhero life?
Well, I personally believe that librarians are superheroes. That's my personal belief. But I have some literary evidence of that in comic books. If anyone has ever heard of Barbara Gordon, also known as Batgirl, Barbara Gordon has a PhD in library science, and she is a librarian at the Gotham Public Library. So librarians are really superheroes.
Yeah. It truly has been such a thread in your life. It's kind of amazing. You were destined to write this book and to speak to all these librarians today, to kind of pay homage to the role they played in your life.
They are superheroes to me. They really are.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in today. Thank you so much, Robert, not only for joining me in this conversation, but for writing this book that will always, it has forever changed me and the countless people who have already read it. I can't wait for you to meet everybody who's seeing you virtually right now come January when the book is out. And so much to celebrate. But in the meantime, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
Good morning. I'm Karen Fink from the Random House Publicity Department, and I am delighted to introduce to you today Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Connie Schultz, whose debut novel, The Daughters of Erietown, will be released on June 9th. Connie, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you to all the librarians willing to watch this, and thank you, Karen, for being here. I'm not shy about saying this. I love working with you, so this is a delight for me.
Likewise. Likewise. So Connie, let's jump right in. Do you mind telling everyone about your debut novel and even a little bit about yourself?
I think if I talk about the novel, you'll know quite a bit about me, because the novel is set among the people of my roots. It's set in a small working class town on the shore of Lake Erie, similar but not identical to the town in which I grew up, Ashtabula, Ohio. And it's full of the people, the spirits of the people, and the soul work of the people I knew growing up, particularly the women, and spans 5 decades in the lives of some women that, well, all of them have dreams, and they have various levels of success with it. And they're also dealing with the restrictions and the limitations of their times and exceeding them often. And it's important to me that we know these stories about women from the working class as well, because we've always had dreams too.
Are there any particular characters that were specifically inspired by people you knew growing up?
I would say professions were inspired, certainly by my parents. The 2 main characters, Ellie and Brick McGinty, hold what we would now call we would call them essential workers. Ellie is a nurse's aide, and Brick is a utility worker. I picked those in part because those are the professions I grew up with, so I know them best. But I also wanted to include them in this book because I do think it's really important to acknowledge, long before we needed to be thinking about it in the age of the coronavirus, acknowledge the people who make our lives work on a daily basis.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, I can't wait for everyone to meet Ellie and Brick. Before we sign off today, do you want to share with us any books that inspired you as a writer and a novelist, or just any great memories you have from libraries?
Well, first of all, I grew up in libraries. That's not an exaggeration. The public library was right next to my high school, but I started going to that library when I was a child, quite young. It's where I first discovered Grace Paley. I would recommend anything by her. Who knew I had more in common with a Jewish woman in New York than some of the women I was meeting at my mom's coffee pledge. Dispatches by Michael Hare, of course, about the Vietnam War. I come from a town, my county lost 26 boys in that war, and the war does factor in my book, as you know. My Day by Eleanor Roosevelt. I didn't know that at some point I would be an opinion writer married to a member of the Senate, but it was certainly a good training for me to learn how to do both. And Seamus, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, excuse me, by Betty Smith. Because it was a little girl I could identify. It was the first time I could see myself in a character. And then there's a poem by Seamus Heaney, Digging, which often reminds me most of my father, because he was writing about his father who was digging in the yard outside while Seamus got to dig with his pen as a writer. And as I inscribed in my first book to my father, thank you for sacrificing so much of you to make so much of me. So I am so grateful to the librarians who are doing everything to make this event right now happen. We're doing a number of talks with libraries despite the book talks being canceled in person. And my goodness, the hard work that's going into this and all the excitement from readers who are letting me know they're still excited to know what's happening, which I hadn't anticipated. So thank you so much. I know a lot of you out there. I wish I knew all of you, but I'm so grateful to all of you for what you're doing for authors like me right now. And I love Karen Fink. You must know this.
Thank you, Connie. And thank you to all the librarians. Again, The Daughters of Erietown will be released on June 9th. Thank you, Connie.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mark Doughton. I'm the literary fiction editor at Soho Press, and it is such an honor to be with you today, virtually. Thank you to every librarian who is sharing their valuable time with us right now in this truly strange moment. And I will say, in this moment, there's no one I would rather be talking to than Gina Apostol, who has such a layered, brilliant way of thinking about history, time, the way that we communicate with each other. And it's also a very, very funny writer. And I find that humor in writing is something I value quite a bit now. Gina has won many prizes, including 2 Philippine National Book Awards, a Pen Open Book Award. Her last book, Insurrector, was a New York Times Editor's Choice and a Publisher's Weekly Top 10 Book of the Year, in addition to being on many other year-end lists. Gina, so happy to be with you. First question, what made you write your novel, The Revolution According to Raymundo Mata?
Thank you, Mark. This book is mainly about a reader who's obsessed with a writer, a klepto-bibliomaniac, that's what I call him. He's in love with this writer, Rizal. He's on the cover of the novel. Hello. And I wrote this to indulge something very, very powerful in me, the love of reading, the love of text. So this book conjoins my obsession as a reader with the story of the Filipino nation and its revolution against Spain, which in some way was produced by a novel, produced by reading the novels of Jose Rizal, this guy on the cover.
So the book, it's set in part in the late 19th century during the revolution, and also with contemporary scholars dealing with issues emerging from that. Is that right?
Yeah.
You made a big revision. So this was initially published only in the Philippines in 2009. It hasn't had a US publication till now. And you decided to make a rather sweeping revision of it. Why for the current publication, and why did you do that?
Yeah. What's happening now is that our sense of reality is destabilized by this concept of fake news. It's used by, used by political propaganda machines. So as I was rewriting this novel, which is about contested readings of Philippine history, Philippine history happens to be full of hoaxes, contested books and manuscripts all over the place. I was very aware. And so my novel is dealing with this hoax history. I was very aware of the last Philippine election of 2016, which used Facebook to manufacture realities for voters that led to this very, very bloodthirsty, horrific president. He used the same political operatives.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, I know. Well, he used the same political operatives as the Trump people. The Philippine election, in my view, was a laboratory for the Trump election, for the US election of 2016. And I knew that's not what my book was about. For me, the imagined text and multiple readings of history in my novel are a matter of truth. So that needed to be clear in my revision. So that was really a big push in terms of my revision, that the world of the imagination is so antithetical to fake news. I just find it really interesting that the love for imagined worlds, which is the world of reading, is for me a way of gaining truth, because in my view, it's about love, the love for art, the love for words. The problem with fake news is that it's about power. My book, with its manufactured text, is about love, the love of books and reading and texts. And so for me, it was very interesting to redo the novel with this history in mind.
So there's similar mechanisms in terms of the way in which, multiple interpretations and fraudulent interpretations circulate around something. But when it comes to literary texts, it can often be an act of love.
Yeah.
And with politics, it's all about the power.
It's all about the power. It's all about destabilizing people's lived realities for the purposes of their greed.
Gina, I have a last question for you, which is about your experience of, since we are here with all of these wonderful librarians today, what were libraries like for you as a kid in the Philippines? Where are you from? Like, what was your local library?
I'm from a very small island on the eastern side of the Philippines called Leyte. And so I'm what you call provinciana. I'm from the provinces. And so I went to a little Catholic school with all the uniforms, etc. I was always being punished for not wearing the right uniform, not wearing the right tie. So I was always being punished by being sent to the library. Which is really great.
No. How horrible.
I know. So I love being punished. So I spent a lot of time in that library, Bobbsey Twins, Nancy Drew, etc. But it was really for me, yeah, I know. It was really for me, Little Women. It's randomly just finding Little Women. It was like a double book with Joe's Boys on the other side. For me, that kind of magic of finding this book that completely changed my life is library magic. It's the magic that librarians offer to us, and it's amazing.
Well, thank you for being here with us, Gina, and thank you to all the librarians and to LJ and PRH for hosting this. Such a pleasure to talk to you, and yes, hope to see you in person soon.
Oh, one day. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenny Jackson, and I'm Vice President and Executive Editor at Alfred A. Knopf. And today I am here to introduce to you Camilla Läckberg, the international sensation #1 best-selling author of The Golden Cage, which is coming from Knopf this July.
Hi, nice to meet you.
So Camilla, can you start us off by just telling everyone what The Golden Cage is about?
Well, it's a new series I started 2 years ago, and it's a book that is very much inspired by both Faye Weldon's fantastic novel, The Lives and Loves of a She-Devil. So it has a lot to do about revenge. And it's also inspired by those wonderful 80s glamorous over-the-top books written by authors like Sidney Sheldon and Judith Krantz, Jackie Collins. I just love them and miss them, so I had to write one of them.
And the main character, Faye, is an incredible creation. What made you decide to write about Faye?
Well, you know, I'm 45 years old and I've been married 3 times. I'm currently married to my third husband, my last husband. And I have 4 children. And, you know, at 45, I can look back at my life as a woman and observe it in a whole new way. And I just wanted to put all those things into a book about a woman who takes back the power over her own life.
How do you hope that both male and female readers in America respond to your work and to your creation of Faye?
Well, I can just judge by how it's been responded to in Sweden and in Europe. In Sweden, it's been the most selling book of 2019, which I'm very, very happy about. And it's been so well received by both men and women. I think a lot of women take away a lot of the power that Faye has. I've actually gotten a few direct messages about women having left their husbands after reading the book. I'm not quite sure if that's good or bad, but I'll just leave it out there. But I think also men have enjoyed it because it's a great story with a lot of action and a lot of big feelings and a lot of things happening. And so I've reached both a male and female audience.
I agree. Now, since this is our chance to talk to librarians, I was wondering if you could just share any special moments or times or parts of your life or things that you've gotten out of your local libraries.
Well, you know, I was the child that would basically live at the library. I was the very precocious old soul that started reading at a very early age, and I started reading very adult books at a very early age. So the librarian in my small hometown, we had a very special relationship, Ella. She was an old lady who knew everything about books. And every week I would drag my big bag of books down to the library and I'd read them all in one week. And she would hand me a big new book, a big new bag of books for me to read. So she kind of guided me through the literary world. And I absolutely love that. So I have a very, very special bond with libraries and librarians.
I love that. I think a lot of us had an Ella in our lives, and that's just a gift that is kind of unparalleled.
And I must say, I'm very proud also that I have a daughter who's 16, who's actually contemplating becoming a librarian.
Yes!
I'm very happy. It's either that or crime technician. She is my daughter. So yeah, she's choosing between those two.
I mean, she could do both, maybe.
That's what I'm saying as well.
One last thing before we go. I just wondered if you could tell everybody about your New York Times bet.
Well, I did a tour in the US a couple of years ago, and I happened to make a promise to an American journalist. I can't remember which magazine it was, but I'm a very competitive person. I must admit that. And it's on my bucket list to be #1 on the New York Times bestseller list at one time or several times through my life. And I said that the time that happens, I will tattoo the top 10 of that day somewhere on my body. So I'm hoping for short names. No Alexander McCall Smith on that day, please.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have it here recorded. It's a tattoo.
It will happen. It will happen.
It will happen. Camilla, thank you so much for talking to us. And I hope everybody enjoys the Golden Cage as much as we at Knopf do. Thank you.
Thank you so much.